Hello, how you doing?
Good.
That's good.
Right.
Amelia, hi. Hang on, I'll put my camera on so we can.
You're still in the bike shed?
I'm still in the bike shed. I'm in the bike shed. I'm in the doghouse. Hi, Amelia, how you doing?
Good, thanks, John. How are you?
Good. You must be relieved to have that incredible project done.
Yeah. Super proud and really pleased to see it being shared. So, and it's great. Now we have some time to spend on sharing it as well, which is awesome.
Fantastic.
Cool. All right. Well, we might get started. Almost 20 people here now. So thank you, everyone, for coming along to this plant forum. If you don't know me, I'm Emma Bodley. I'm the chair of BCARM, which is the collections and records group, which we talk about all sorts of things, from horticulture to professional development to plant records. So today I'm really excited to have two speakers for you. So we've got Barbara Wheeler from Auckland Botanic Gardens, who's my boss. She's the curator, and she joined us a couple of months ago from Dunedin Botanic Garden. And our first speaker today is going to be Amelia Yenson, and Amelia was a project manager for the Germplasm guidelines. So she's going to tell you all about that. So over to you, Amelia.
Fantastic. And thanks, Emma, for inviting me to present at the Plant Forum today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I am today, the Darug people of the Eora Nation, and particularly the Bidjigal clan, who are custodians of the land between the Georges River and the saltwater of Kamei, or Botany Bay, where I live. It's great to have an opportunity to share an overview of the new germplasm guidelines, and it's fantastic to have some people online who were the authors or case study authors or reviewers for the guidelines. And a big thank you to everyone who's helped us out. I'd like to start by sharing the first Plant Treasures video that we made to launch the guidelines. So if you just bear with me, I'll share my screen. And I'll share it with the computer sound so that you can hear what's happening as well, which will be best.
From deserts to wetlands, rainforest, woodland, and alpine ecosystems, Australia's flora has evolved to survive diverse climates and stresses.
We have more than 23,000 plant species.
90% of the plants in Australia are only found in Australia. They're endemic to Australia.
"24 years ago, the Germplasm guidelines were developed. These guidelines bring together our expertise in preserving Australia's unique flora and their genetic material away from their natural habitats. But in the same 24 years since these guidelines were developed, Australia's flora has faced increasingly complex challenges.
Australia has one of the worst global extinction records. The estimates of species extinction are between about 55 and 70 plant species, and more than 10% are still threatened with extinction. This is largely because of many co-occurring threats, including weeds, pests and diseases, overgrazing, habitat loss, changed fire regimes, and of course, climate change.
Some of the threats are so big, like a warming climate and the uncomfortable nature of how that feels, and the idea of having frequent severe wildfires covering most of eastern and western Australia, that's a serious issue for everybody who lives in this country. So you've got to start to deal with these threats, and you've got to start to deal with it.
Preserving populations in the wild is vital, but is inadequate to alone protect our flora. We must respond through improving our off-site or ex situ conservation methods, which is why the Germplasm guidelines have been updated.
There are new guidelines on the genetics of capturing and maintaining an ex situ collection. There are also new guidelines for species that need extra care in ex situ conservation, so orchids, special collections, and non-orthodox species as well. There's a lot of new information on identifying and conserving species that just don't suit conventional seed banking.
The updated Germplasm guidelines are designed with use in mind. Use by volunteers, researchers, students, community groups, not-for-profits and government. With over 68% of Australia's threatened plant species represented in conservation seed banks, the way we preserve populations off-site or ex situ is more important than ever. Ex situ collections aim to safeguard species for use in the wild, either now or in a future we cannot predict.
If you're a property owner, investor, or have $60,000, then I will show you how.
As we said at the launch, we really tried to capture the guidelines that were a message of hope and action in the face of all these threats that we face. And I'll go on now to the more formal part of the presentation and delve a bit into the detail of what we're doing in the guidelines. Okay. I think you can probably see my notes screen there, or can you just see the presentation?
Just a presentation.
Oh, awesome. Fantastic. I've got it right. Thank you for practicing with me. So this is the third edition of the Germplasm guidelines for ex situ plant conservation. So for ex situ plant collections, so collections that are held off-site. And we were so lucky, they were updated by 78 contributors with oversight from the Germplasm Guidelines Steering Committee, including all those organisations that you can see on screen there. And we've been really lucky to have Beck Stanley, who is at Auckland Botanic Garden and was the New Zealand chair of BCARM on our steering committee, and Beck's been a great supporter throughout. I'd also like to acknowledge that the project was funded by the Ian Potter Foundation, and their funding is one of the reasons that the guidelines are available for free download. But you might have heard that ANPC has led the update of 3 different guidelines recently. So the translocation guidelines came out in 2018, and the Flora Bank guidelines were released in August this year, followed by the Germplasm guidelines in September. So all of these guidelines bring together research and knowledge, experience, and so yeah, I will concentrate today on the Germplasm guidelines. So not to be put off by the word germplasm, it just means they're any kind of plant tissue that can be turned into new plants. So we often think of seeds, and we really like this definition from the UC Davis Seed Biotechnology Centre. So it also includes things like leaf material and spores and pollen that a germplasm can be used to produce new living plants. So in the first chapter of the guidelines and also the Flora Bank guidelines, we're really careful to show that these ex situ or off-site actions are complementary to in situ or on-site actions. And there's several possible options within each. So you can see in ex situ conservation, there's a range of options. So seed banking is the one we think about often. Nursery propagation, which is where botanic gardens often come in, so valuable. There's also micropropagation or tissue culture and living collections, such as plants maintained in botanic gardens. And these produce a source of propagules, but also information that is so important for in situ conservation and the things that happen on site. So they're methods that work together. And going through to chapter 2, we have this really nice snapshot of where the main locations are for ex situ conservation. And this one focuses on the partners and associates of the Australian Seed Bank Partnership and a couple of forestry seed banks that also store native seeds. And you can see that many of the seed banks and conservation nurseries are located within Botanic Gardens. So we also have the Australian Grains Gene Bank and the Australian Pastures Gene Bank that store wild relatives of crop species as well as agricultural species. And there's many smaller seed banks. Often they have a restoration focus, so they won't be storing seeds perhaps for as long. And certainly they would aim to have larger quantities available to meet the restoration needs that they have. And there's also some university facilities that have cryo storage. So this is not an exhaustive list, but it does give you some idea of where you can go for advice or assistance. Throughout the guidelines, we have boxes to indicate key concepts. And the idea is not to show you that you need to take in all the detail of this box, but in chapter 2, we're talking all about the options, the big things you need to consider and how to prepare for germplasm conservation. And this is a flow chart that we can use to decide what options are best for the situation. And then later in that chapter, there's boxes on deciding where to collect germplasm and obtaining permission or licenses to collect, hold and utilise germplasm, which is really important. In this chapter, it's really key that the collections are linked to the end use. What's the purpose of making the collections and what's the exit plan? How do you want to use them at the end? And it's also really important to understand the species biology. So can the seed be dried? Can it be stored? And there's also case studies all the way throughout the guidelines. So I'll go through quickly now, a bit of a chapter overview and then a bit more of a deep dive into the chapters that may be quite immediately useful for you. A chapter that's new to this guidelines is on genetic guidelines for acquiring and maintaining collections. And it gives you guidance based on whether you have genetic information available or not. So in most situations, it's ideal to have a targeted study so you can match the outcome that you want with the collecting plan and the resources that are available for maintenance. There's also chapters that have been updated to do with collection techniques, banking of orthodox seeds, and germination and dormancy. There is so much good practical information in these chapters, and they're really useful for planning and problem solving. We also have a new chapter on identifying and conserving non-orthodox seeds, which can't be dried or frozen and maybe can't be stored long term. And we also have some video resources to support you in identifying and making decisions about whether you have non-orthodox, sometimes called recalcitrant seeds. We also have a new chapter in these guidelines on the role of the plant nursery in ex situ conservation. In our previous editions, this information has been spread throughout, but really a lot of germplasm collections move through the nursery at some stage between collection and use. So there's lots of information in this chapter about vegetative propagation. There's an info box about all different cutting types, information about division and layering, grafting and budding. And we've included case studies on planning and partnerships, which are so important, including the establishment of meta collections of threatened species from cloud forests in far north Queensland. This was one that John Arnott and Warren Warboys wrote about. And also in the partnerships theme, the southeastern New South Wales bioregion, their work in conserving scrub turpentine and just how important that was when the fires came through. And so that includes collections at Booderee Botanic Garden, Eurobodalla Botanic Garden and the Australian National Botanic Garden, as well as others. So we also have updated information on tissue culture and cryopreservation. And these chapters now include a list of species stored using these methods in Australian germplasm banks. So I think that's a really useful starting point if you are looking at using these methods or need some resources. The chapter on living collections has been updated. Amanda Shade led this, and I'm thrilled that she's joining us today. And it covers all kinds of living collections that we know are maintained for different purposes. It's fantastic to see progress in some of the case studies that were included in the second edition and now are updated in the third edition, including a case study on the rare and threatened garden beds at RBG Victoria, the Melbourne Garden. Just a bit more of a snapshot on case studies in that chapter. And thanks to all the contributors, we couldn't have done this without you. There's case studies on the King's Lamatia, on the Care for the Rare program, and you can see the happy team there at the Australian Botanic Garden, Shepparton. There's quite a bit about seed orchards. There's a case study of seed orchard establishment for native guava at the Australian Botanic Garden, Mount Annan, and you can see a snapshot of that. There's also information about bulking seed collections and seed production systems for restoration. More about seed orchards at the Royal Tasmanian Botanical Gardens, an insight into the orchid conservation program of RBG Victoria. And throughout the guidelines, there's a lot of information and case studies on myrtle rust. And in this chapter, we have Beck Stanley and Emma Bodley, who wrote a great case study on managing plants that are highly susceptible to pathogens. So that's a great addition. There's also a lot of information about capturing genetic diversity while maintaining an appropriate number of plants. And I love this picture of the conservation geneticists, Trevor and Sam with the Amelia spicata collection at Mount Annan. They were trying to reduce the plant number, so they were maintaining all the genotypes without having excess numbers of plants. So it was great to chat to them about that as we developed the guidelines. And we finish up the guidelines with new chapters on orchids, a dedicated chapter this time about conserving orchids and the symbiotic mycorrhiza, and also a little bit about legume rhizobia as well, another one of those symbiotic relationships. We've got a chapter on special collections that includes ferns and carnivorous and parasitic plants. And there's also a key chapter on risk management and crisis preparation, which does sound a bit dry, but is really critical to address the challenges facing germplasm banks now and into the future. And Graham Errington did a great job with that chapter. And we conclude the guidelines with a new chapter on maintaining and using collections, which really links back to the first chapters on planning and preparation that you make in line with the project goals. And that chapter also goes into the management of the data and images that accompany the collections and that need to be maintained long term. Now that the guidelines are released, they're available for free download, as I mentioned, and I encourage you to do that. And you can also register your interest in the print edition, which we're just finalising at the moment. If you'd like to get a copy of that for your garden or library or for your own use, you're very welcome. We're sharing the information as widely as we can, and if you'd like to help us, you're more than welcome to add a note to your garden's newsletter or join us for future webinars. We are going to switch to a more webinar focus than in-person workshops, and we hope that brings us to a wider audience than might always be able to attend in person, which is great. And the best way to hear about all the future activities associated with the guidelines is to subscribe to ANPC's free monthly e-newsletter, and the address is there. And finally, a big thank you to all of the chapter authors, case study authors and reviewers for supporting us. We couldn't have done this without you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Amelia. That was great. I've had obviously a little bit of involvement with the guidelines, but now that it's published, it's a really good read, and I highly recommend downloading it and just perusing those chapters that might be of interest to you. And also to point out for any of the New Zealand folk out there, even though this has kind of come from Australia, this really is the Bible, I feel, for germplasm in New Zealand as well. We're too small a country to do our own, so we might as well piggyback on this work. And as Amelia mentioned, there are a few New Zealand case studies in there that are really, really useful So are there any questions from the audience? Feel free to write them in the chat or just unmic yourself for Amelia. Maybe just pondering still. So Amelia, you mentioned to me when we were just getting ready that you are kind of working on over the next kind of 6 months, is that right? Just the engagement side of this and connecting with everyone?
Yeah, we're really lucky because we have that project management support from the Ian Potter Foundation. It means that we can spend a bit of time sharing the guidelines, so newsletter articles, probably a scientific paper as well, just so that it gets out there to a bigger audience, a couple more videos, which is great. They're going to have themes about conservation horticulture and the role of the nursery, and also using plant collections. And then we're going to have a series of informal webinars and maybe one more formal webinar as well. So if you've got ideas, if you read the guidelines and there's something you really want to know about and you want me to get chapter authors and case study authors online, we're in the planning phase now, so this is a great time. Give me your wish list and we'll see what we can do.
Awesome, that's great. And I just thought I'll come to you in a second, John, that next year we have our BCARM Congress, hopefully in person, fingers crossed. And so that might be another good opportunity to do some kind of workshop or have another seminar.
Yeah, I do hope so.
Which was exactly what I was going to say, Emma.
Great minds.
There are just wonderful opportunities with the Global Botanic Garden Congress, which is be held in September next year. So we will be in contact, Amelia, without a doubt.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. I'm really hoping to get there. And the other thing I didn't mention is that because we have this webinar format, we had one webinar on exceptional times, exceptional plants, during the week of the launch, and we had attendees from like 29 countries. So I think there's quite a big appetite regionally for this information, and we've done our best throughout the guidelines to show what people can do at a smaller scale, because you don't need a big seed bank to be doing this kind of work, but just knowing which procedures are key I think is really helpful, and then you can implement them at a range of scales. You can start small and get plenty done, and I know there's gardens in New Zealand who do that, and volunteer groups who do that. So I noticed that John Bentley has asked in the chat if there's a role for smaller volunteer-based regional botanic gardens. Absolutely, John. And when we were producing things like the videos and adding the case studies, we really had those volunteers in mind, because they underpin so much of what happens at regional and indeed at bigger botanic gardens as well. It just amplifies what we can do as botanic gardens. And so I hope the guidelines are really accessible and easy to read without being overwhelming in terms of information. You kind of can dip into what's of interest to you, and certainly if you have an interest in seed collecting, then lean on the Australian Seed Bank partnerships and people who are already in there doing that work, and so you can upskill as well.
Awesome. And just to connect, John Bentley, your comment there, hoping that the Hortus database that BCARM's is kind of making accessible to at least Victoria Gardens and the rest of BCARM's members as a way and a tool for you to be able to monitor and document your collections to feel like you're really adding value to conservation at kind of a regional and a national scale. So hopefully you've checked that out. I know you've been on many of those calls already. So
yeah, I think given this is a plant records forum, I think one of the things we'd really like to do is get some people on who wrote in the guidelines about record keeping and managing ex situ collections, because it can be quite labour intense, especially if you need to maintain maternal lines and track identity over many years, and with different database resources available or perhaps not available. So I think that would be quite a neat one to do. So yeah, let me know if there's interest in that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll put my hand up to say I think that would be interest to this particular group, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions out there? No? Okay, well,
No.
thank you again, Amelia. And Amelia will hang around for the rest of the seminar. So feel free to add anything to the chat if you think of it. And now for our second speaker, it's Barbara Wheeler from Auckland Botanic Gardens. She's the curator. She came to us from Dunedin Botanic Gardens a few months ago. So she is going to give you a bit of a talk on Longwood Gardens, plant inspiration from there, and a little bit maybe about the fellowship that she did through there. So I'll hand over to you, Barbara.
Awesome. Thanks, Emma. Kia ora, everybody. I have just done a crash course today with Mitch Newton, who I know is on at the minute. Thanks, Mitch, on using a double screen. So let's hope it all works for me. With a bit of luck. Can you all see that?
Yeah, you're good to go.
Sweet. So I'm going to quite a different presentation to Amelia's. Thanks, Amelia. That was awesome to Amelia's. But I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey today and weave you through a little bit of my career pathway to where I am now. And I'm doing that because it links into this leadership course that I just came back from mid last year at Longwood. Hopefully along the way, I will answer the burning question that most people have had of me, and that is how and why did I end up at the US at Longwood Gardens in a leadership program? And as I go through the presentation, you may find similarities with where you are in your career, if you're in early or coming through your career, or you may find that there are pathways you did not know existed in horticulture that you can pass on to people that are within your charge. Whatever, I hope you glean something from this presentation today. And we're going to trace the journey back to 1990, and I was entering horticulture for the very first time as an apprentice at Dunedin Botanic Garden. And that foundation really set me up for everything that was to come thereafter. But I recall at that time very vividly that there was one thing that was crystal clear, and that was that on graduation, I wanted to be a plant collection curator at a botanic garden. I didn't have any ambition to go beyond that. That was my dream role. And opportunities presented themselves, and so it was for me. So I took the plunge, and in 1994, once I graduated from my apprenticeship, I had my first exposure to Longwood Gardens on the International Gardener Program. There I am, very young and very blonde-haired, with my mouth open because I never stopped talking. And I built on the experience at Longwood Gardens and had many other experiences around the world at other amazing public gardens, and interspersed that with coming back to New Zealand in the hopes of getting a job at a botanic garden, preferably in my hometown of Dunedin. And those opportunities that I took around the world allowed me to get both that really good experience at a variety of outstanding public gardens, but also allowed me or exposed me to many, many different people, different leaders, different leadership styles, and all of that would help inform me in years to come. But my thoughts overall during this time on my ambitions still remained the same. I wanted to get a position as a plant collection curator at a botanic garden, which, as you all know, is as rare as hen's teeth. Skip forward to 2002, and with all those experiences behind me, a role came up at the Dunedin Botanic Garden as in plant collections management. And I remember at the time, a little bit like this image on screen, I absolutely agonised over that decision as to whether to apply or not. And in many ways in my head, I wasn't really ready to go for that role. I still wanted to learn more about curating a plant collection. And I was in my very early 30s and not sure I wanted to really step into the office and manage at a sort of middle management level. But step up I did, and the rationale was purely that opportunities to work in botanic gardens don't come around too often. So stepping up was on balance a decent call to make at that time. I was covering a maternity leave position at Dunedin Botanics, and the person was coming back, and so there was really the future in Botanic Gardens wasn't looking so rosy to continue with curating, let alone working at a botanic garden. And over the course of the next 18 years, I learned a lot about management, a lot about operations, administration within a botanic garden, and of course, leadership. And as leadership often teaches you when you are immersed in it, I learned a lot about myself. But in 2018, after 18 years in that role, I was really having a major internal quandary. I was still working in a challenging role, but not really seeing where it was leading. I'd sort of stagnated in my own mind. And I've never really been one to sit back and wait for opportunities. Rather, I'm very much an opportunity seeker. I'm always keen to grow professionally and personally, but at this point, I had absolutely no idea what to do next and where that next path was. I couldn't even see the beginnings of a path for progression without moving out of the botanic garden space, which was not a desirable option and not negotiable for me. But I knew with absolute certainty that I couldn't remain static. And this is where BCARM's actually helped me, because I saw in one of their newsletter email adverts, advertising for a leadership program at Longwood Gardens. And it really did seem to tick all the boxes for what I was wanting. It was a 13-month program. It had on-site accommodation as part of the package. It was a paid program, always attractive. And the program content was all about leadership development, which sort of seemed to tick all the right boxes for me. And that brought me 25 years later, after my first foray at Longwood Gardens, back to that same garden. And Longwood, for those who don't know, or a lot of you will know of Longwood Gardens, it's a truly exceptional garden, and the staff continually push themselves with growing, as this byline says, growing extraordinary plants in extraordinary ways. And Longwood employs more than 600 staff. It's like a small city council in a lot of ways. And it's got over 1,000 volunteers working throughout the various departments. Funded from a DuPont bequest, and of course through gate takings and shop, cafe, restaurant revenue, also event revenue as well. And over 1.6 million visitors per year. And I think at the moment the annual operating budget is US 80 million per year. So why the Fellows Program, and why on earth does Longwood do such a thing? Well, Longwood have actually invested in some form of leadership programming since 1967, when they were paired up with the University of Delaware and delivered the Longwood Graduate Program. It was a 2-year program, and it was primarily delivered on campus at the University of Delaware. In 2017, there was a review done into that graduate program led by Longwood and leaders from around the world. And they realised that leadership was a key focus moving forward. And as with all public and botanic gardens globally, there was a really deep-seated concern. And that was because there's a shortage of leaders with the right skill base coming through. So the idea of building leadership capacity for the wider public horticulture industry through a leadership-focused program was developed into what is the Fellows Program. I'm sure we all know of people that fit both of these categories displayed, right? Being a leader is not an easy task, and nor is it a very easy transition. It's very much a skill, and it's just like anything else. That skill has to be worked on and developed to get and be better at it. And generally, when you're in the full murky nature of your job, very little time is able to be spent on leadership. You're too busy doing, you're too busy leading to think about and work on your leadership outside of sending or being sent on a leadership course. And leaders have to be many things these days, but the most important is in allowing those you lead to be the best they can in their roles, to reach their fullest potential, and to move you as an organisation towards achieving your mission, your vision, and your strategic objectives. And that's a very easy paragraph to say, but it's a very, very hard job, as I'm sure all of you will be aware. And when I talk about leadership here, I'm half talking about positional leadership, but I'm also very mindful of non-positional leadership. And that's obviously when you are within a position that doesn't require you people to report to you. So when I talk about leadership, I'm doing it in the broader sense because some of the fellows in my year never had a leadership position before as a position where people reported to them, nor in fact were they going into roles that had that. And we all within our roles are leaders, and as such we should all think about how we can be better at that job. So the Fellows Program is based around core curriculum, and it's supplemented with learning from other leaders in the public garden and the not-for-profit industry in the United States. The access to leaders right through the US from the CEO and board level down was astounding. Such an opportunity to be able to speak to those leaders. And the program was about putting all those learnings into practice, and it was very much through trying and getting feedback and trying again. And you're learning through success and failure. And while it's confronting, it's learning with safety, and you're in a very constructed environment that you can learn with that psychological safety. The core curriculum covers many topics, right from leadership theory to governance, to the ones that are shown in this picture on leadership communications, on leadership presence and media relations. And that's just to name a tiny component of the curriculum. My construct of what a leader is and was meant to be was blown apart by this program. It became clear to me that while I'd spent my career to date not believing I was a leader, and in fact running from saying that, I actually had better sort myself out, and I realised that on that program, and I'd better sort myself out to be a leader and be a better leader and be more effective, so that I could have greater impact within public and botanic garden industry, and whether that be locally, nationally, or even globally. And self-awareness and reflection was central to the program, as these are central to becoming a better leader. Understanding yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, your blind spots, your biases, all of that's important information to understand really intimately about yourself. And we did that through a lot of, I think we had 5 personality profiles that were done, each one with I think one was a book of about 30 pages on yourself. We did it through feedback from others. I remember one horribly confronting time of having to email back home to New Zealand to my friends and family, previous managers, managers currently, some of my colleagues and staff who used to report to me, to ask them to provide me feedback on how I was as a leader and a person. So you can understand from that, it's very confronting at times. You were, and feedback comes at you from so many places. The important thing about this program is it's not about making leaders the Longwood way. It's not a sausage machine. It's not meant to pump out leaders the way that Longwood think that a leader should be. The premise is to give you knowledge through the curriculum components, through the personality profiles, and through the enormous amount of feedback. And then you as an individual fellow determine how you will build yourselves up to be the leader that you want to be. What parts of your behaviours and your personality do you want to strengthen, and what parts do you want to pull back on? So a lot of looking in the mirror, and for me, a lot of really reflecting on who I was and how I wanted to lead. And so all my paths have led me to where I am today, here at Auckland Botanic Gardens as curator. And it's, as you can see by that image, it's another of the world's spectacular botanic gardens, and we're so lucky to have them all over the world. The Fellows program was incredible. As I said, it was confronting. It pushed us in so many ways beyond points of how we felt comfortable, and actually beyond our sort of frame of reference of our own capability. And as I said before, we often don't get the time in our jobs to spend much time on our own leadership journeys. And it was a real privilege to be able to do this as part of the Longwood program. And when I look back to those first years as an apprentice, I would not have predicted the journey. And the takeaway I guess I want you to go away with today is to really look out for opportunities to grow. And whatever that looks like for you, because individually, because it's different for us all. I'm lucky I had a lifestyle I can just shoot away to the US at the drop of a hat, but not everyone's the same. Opportunities can allow us to push beyond and not be limited by our own insecurities. And while I didn't seek leadership, in some ways I ran from it my whole career as I travelled the world. I ended up in it, and now I understand how important that role is in ensuring succession planning for the next generation of leaders coming through. And I want to finish by showing you a little bit of what is the beauty of Longwood Gardens. And here we are in the meadow. It was my favourite area in the International Gardener program, and still a favourite area of mine when I was there last year. Chrysanthemums, since Longwood's founder, Pierre Dupont's days, chrysanthemums have been a part of the autumnal displays. Laboriously trained for up to 15 months, the display always attracts thousands and thousands of visitors to see how Longwood staff have pushed the boundaries of horticulture each year. The cascade chrysanthemums that form all the three-dimensional shapes are always popular, and they always take your breath away. And then the spectacular pinnacle of chrysanthemum growing, this ancient Japanese technique of training chrysanthemums, the 1,000 bloom mum. It had 1,649 blooms on a single plant in the year that I was there. Extraordinary is also personified in this. It's an Ikebana Sugetsu display, the traditional art of Japanese floral design. And this is the first time Longwood have attempted such an install, and it was massive in the year that I was there. And these models show the vision. And here is what the final display looked like. Just incredible structures of bamboo and ribbons of bamboo to create that display. Springtime, as in any garden around the world, springtime is magical. And the water lily terrace is a summer showstopper. These large platter water lilies, Victoria amazonica, Victoria cruziana, and the Longwood cultivar are just nothing short of astounding. Fountains are blinged up for summer performances with coloured lights, music, flames, and fireworks. There's nothing like that fireworks display. It's an assault on every sense that you have. The fountains are also blinged up in autumn with lights and music after dark. And as Christmas approaches, the Christmas lights come out after Thanksgiving. And this is partly why Longwood can be known as the theme park of the horticultural world, but it really connects people. Christmas extends down to the meadow, and that's a move to take some pressure off the conservatories. And more displays are moving down to the outer reaches of the garden to take some pressure off those main conservatories with numbers of public coming through. Fire pits provide cosy nooks along the way, and carts that sell hot chocolate are really popular. And they also sell, thankfully, an adult version with Baileys to keep visitors warm. And one of my favourite areas of Longwood Gardens is the meadow on a foggy summer's morning, as long as you don't walk amongst it and get hit with ticks. But to finish, I'd like to just to encourage anyone who might be thinking what the next step is to go to the Longwood Fellows Program link that I've got up there. You can also feel free to reach out to me as well. Try not to get caught up in self-doubt when you look at that program outline. I had no idea what I was really walking into with this program. Nothing can prepare you for it. Even having been flown over for the interview process to Longwood, that did not prepare me for what the program was and what it contained. And what I can honestly say without a shadow of a doubt is that I would not be at Auckland Botanic Gardens without having been on that program. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. That was great. Nice to see your kind of journey in your career and a little bit of plant inspiration there at the end. So are there any questions from the audience for Barbara? I believe we've had one other recent BCARM's member go on the Fellows program in 2016-17, so just before that review from Sydney. But it'd be great to see more of us participating in it. And as Barbara said, she's very happy to chat to you if you are interested and you just want to know a little bit more first-hand experience. I know myself, I've looked at that website and thought, oh my goodness, that's very daunting, and closed it. So it's kind of nice to chat to someone who's done it before.
Absolutely. And that's what I did, Emma. I looked at it and was daunted. And then I chatted to one of the graduates that actually visited New Zealand while they were on the program, and she said, no, just reach out to the director of the Fellows program and chat to her. So I did, and she was like, you're absolutely the type of person we want applying. I spoke to the new director of the Fellows program recently, and I told her I was doing this, and she said to pass on to you all, they really want Australian and New Zealand people to apply. They are dead keen. And I just saw there's an Eamon flick up a note in the just saying that it would be great to have a New Zealand or Australian there each year. It's it's an experience that is well worthwhile. And as Emma said, don't hesitate to reach out to me if you've got any questions or just want to have a chat to someone who's been there and done it.
Any questions? Just feel free to, I think that's
I
Mitch.
see Mitch got her hand up.
Jump in, Mitch.
Hi, thanks, Barbara. I did make a comment, but we are really excited that you are working with us. And it's just a shame that COVID has obviously dampened that a little bit and made it a little bit more challenging for you to get seriously involved. One of the things I wanted to ask was the other people on the course, just to share with the rest of the team, they weren't necessarily all horticulturalists.
No, thanks, Mitch. That's a great question. They weren't all horticulturists. They came through a botanic garden or public garden way, but they weren't all horticulturists like I had been through, or a couple of the others. One of them hadn't really touched plants before, but worked in a public garden or a botanic garden in the US, more in the marketing and promotion line. Another had worked in education in a botanic garden in Santa Fe in New Mexico. So it's really different as to what your previous experience was. They're looking for people that are committed to a career in leadership in the public or botanic garden sphere, and whatever that looks like. That, you know, there's openings for people that haven't done the track that I particularly did. So yeah, there's a lot of options for people.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments? I know we've had a little chat in the conversation in the chat there about other opportunities. So if, you know, as Barbara said, this is quite a big shift for some people. Was it 13 months, Barbara?
Yeah, 13 months, and yeah, and it is a massive shift. I mean, you've got to be able to pack up your life for 13 months and live in at the moment, it's still communal living. Having said that, you're living in a 7-bedroom mansion. So, I mean, gosh, there's lots of space to have your own space. But and it's that's a huge part of the program, is that you're exposed to another 4 or 5 other leaders that you're living in and working with that whole 13 months. And that's something that is a massive part of the program, to learn off each other. But it is a massive move. It definitely is.
And so I'd encourage you, if if you're thinking about it and the time is right, I'd take it. I know, there are people who might regret not being able to do it because of family and things like that. But if you can, I always say yes to opportunities. So if that's kind of something that might tickle your fancy, I think go for it. I just want to promote that BCARM does have professional development awards. And Amon, correct me if I'm wrong, but fair to say we don't get lots of applicants. So it'd be great to see more of you utilising that if you want to dip your toe and use that funding to come to New Zealand, or go to the other side of Australia, and just get a couple of weeks experience in another garden a bit more locally to home. Megan here said she went to Chicago BG, which is great. I've been there too. It's amazing.
Yeah, and there's gardens all over the US, and that offer internships, and whether they be a year long or 6 months long, some of them might only be a couple of months. Or Pippa Lucas at Auckland Botanic Garden went and volunteered at Chanticleer Garden in Pennsylvania for, I'm not sure for how long actually, Emma, was it a couple of weeks or a month?
Weeks, yeah.
So there's lots of opportunities that might fit in with what your life is at the time.
Yeah, that's great. We do little swaps in New Zealand where someone comes to Auckland and then we send a staff member down, so you still get paid, but you get to experience somewhere else and do something a little different, which is always super valuable. So we only get about 3 or 4 applicants for most awards, so please apply, and even if you don't get it, apply again. There is literally no harm in that. The more the merrier, and that also helps BCARM's council drive for knowing that there's actually more interest, so we can go after funding to fund more of you to do these types of trips. So please apply. So I just want to say thank you to both our speakers today. It's been wonderful having you. I hope you as the audience have enjoyed a slightly different format to the Plant Forum. Next month, on the 11th of November, is our final Plant Forum for the year. We've got Amanda Shade from Kings Park talking about myrtle rust in seed collection. We've also got Matt Henderson from Cranbourne and Ben from the Dandenong Ranges. So we've got a bunch of really exciting talks for November. So hopefully I see many of you then. Other than that, if you have any questions from today, please feel free to reach out to me, and hopefully see you all next month. Thanks all.
Awesome. Kia ora, Emma. Thank you.